Great. Thank you, Kathleen. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. What I want to do today is just what Kathleen said. I want to make sure that we all sort of are on the same level. Some of you come here today, you'll know everything I'm going to say, and some of you will know very little. I guarantee you at the end of the next 20 minutes, you'll all be experts. National popular vote is not that difficult, but I appreciate it more when I tell it as a story and like, how did we get here? So let's jump right in, and I want to just do a few things and say this. Under the current presidential election system, whether your vote matters depends on where you live. Think about that. The reason that is, we have to start back at the beginning in 1787, the Constitutional Convention. In 1787, countries were run by dictators and monarchs, dynasties, conquerors. The United States was the very first country that decided to elect its head of state. Today, that doesn't seem unusual that people elect their head of state, but back then it was. And the problem that they had in the Constitutional Convention was, we know we want to elect the head of state, but how do we do it? Who does it? Some of the choices they looked at included having Congress elect the president, having the governors of the states elect the president, having legislatures do it, or directly by the people. In the end, the compromise was the Electoral College. That's how it was established, as a compromise. Today, every state has electors, and the number of electors is equal to the number of members of Congress from that state. So if you're from Florida, there are 30 electors because there are 28 members of the House of Representatives and 2 senators. So there's a total of 538 electors across 50 states and the District of Columbia. The winner of the Electoral College needs 270 votes. So that's half plus 1. 270 is the magic number. No matter how many popular votes a person gets, they need 270 electoral votes. And because of this Electoral College, and because you don't need the most votes across the country, twice in the last 6 elections, the second place candidate in the popular vote race won the presidency because they had more electoral votes. Fewer popular votes, more electoral votes. And by the way, it happened 3 times in the 1800s. So for a total of 5 out of 46 presidents, more than 10%, were elected because they received more electoral votes than they did popular votes. So probably a lot of people in this room and a lot of people across the country think we should just abolish the Electoral College. It's antiquated, it's confusing, it was a compromise, it's time for a change. The problem is, abolishing the Electoral College is almost impossible. It would require a 2/3 vote of both chambers of Congress, and I could stop there, but it also requires 38 states to ratify it. Now, we could also do a constitutional convention that has its own set of issues. The bottom line is, neither one of these things will really solve the problem in the near future on getting rid of the Electoral College. But there's another way we can change this system. There's another way that we can fix this problem. So the Constitution leaves it to every state to create their own system for awarding electors. And over the years, there have been a number of different ways that states used to decide how their electors would be awarded. In fact, in Massachusetts, they've had 11 different systems for awarding electors. On election night, we're used to seeing one candidate win an entire state. You know, they call a state for one person. And all the electors in that state go to that one candidate. But in the beginning, that's not how it was done. That's not how it was envisioned. Let me just show you this one. In 1796 was one of the first elections, actually the 3rd election. George Washington decided not to run again, And we ended up with the election of 1796. John Adams, the Northern Federalist, is running against Thomas Jefferson, the Southern Democratic Republican. And in that election, Adams wins 71 electoral votes to 68 electoral votes. And when Jefferson looked at this election and looked at the results, he said, you know, each of us received almost all the votes in every state, except a few. And when he looked at Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Virginia, he realized that he lost one vote in each of those three states, 3 votes. He lost the election by 3 votes. So he thought if he could co-opt those 3 votes, if the rule had been if you win most of the votes, you win them all, Jefferson would have won those 3 states and he would have won the election. So they quickly moved, Jefferson and his pals, to change Virginia's law and say if you win most, you win them all. And soon that caught on, that the candidate in a state who wins the most votes should receive all the electoral votes. And today there are 48 states that use that system. It's called winner take all. The candidate who wins the most votes wins all the votes. If that system was in place in 1796, Adams would not have won the election. The problem with this winner take all in the states is that it creates swing states and spectator states. And we've all heard lots about swing states. They're also known as battleground states. Those are the states that are so evenly split. They could go red or blue. It's hard to predict. A spectator state, on the other hand, is a state that's not close, that we know today how they're going to vote in November. We know what the majority of the people in that state are going to do. So when we watch on election night, you find out or you see that winners in more than half the states are announced even before all the votes are officially counted. The reason is that most states are spectator states. We know they're predictably red or blue. Swing states, on the other hand, the states that could go red or blue, are not predictable. And the real election takes place in the 12 or fewer swing states. Those are the people that will determine the president. And we know that in 2020, there were just 12 swing states. And 96% of all campaign election events by the candidates were in those 12 states. This is how many actual events there were in each of those states. And the reason is candidates don't want to waste their time in states that they can't win or in states they can't lose. So they spend all their time in the swing states. And the problem is that there are fewer and fewer swing states in each election. In the election cycle we're in right now, there are maybe 9 swing states at the most. Most people agree there are 3 to 5. The voters in those 3 to 5 states are going to determine the president. That means that 20% or less of the population determines the president. So I go back to my original statement, whether your vote matters for president depends on whether you live in a swing state. Now, hopefully you're looking at this saying, I knew a lot of this, I didn't know all of this, I'm a little bit annoyed. So I'm going to give you a moment to relax, take a deep breath, stay calm. I like to say it gets better, but it doesn't. Let me show you a little bit more of reality. So it's bad enough that swing states choose the president. But if you look at the elections, the last 6 elections since 2000, you find that elections are decided by just 20,000 to 60,000 swing state voters. It doesn't matter that somebody wins 3 million, 5 million, 7 million votes more than their opponent. The real election is decided by 20 to 60,000 people. If you look at 2020, Biden won because of 21,500 voters across 3 states. That's it. It's 0.2% of the voters in those 3 states. Had they voted for Trump instead of Biden, Trump would have been the president. So despite the fact that Biden won by 7 million votes, he won because of those 21,500 voters. And if we go back to 2016, Trump won because of 39,000 voters across these 3 states. That's 0.3% of the voters in those 3 states. Despite the fact that Clinton won by 3 million votes across the country, Trump won because of 39,000 votes. And it's not just about the last 2 elections. We can go back to 2004. In that election, Bush won because of 60,000 voters in Ohio. There were almost 6 million voters in Ohio. He won by 0.1%. To give you an idea what 0.1% is, if you had 1,000 people in a room, 1 person is 0.1%. That's how close that election was. It hinged on 1 out of 1,000. So I thought I'd give you time to take another deep breath. Cute picture of dogs, you can't beat it. Before I go on to show you what else is a problem. So if you look at this chart, what you're going to see are the number of people represented by 1 elector in each state. So if you look to the left side, you'll see, for instance, Vermont. 1 elector represents 200,000 people. And on the right side, Florida, 1 elector represents almost 800,000 people, or 4 times as many. So despite the fact that the Vermont elector represents 1/4, 25% of the voters in Florida, that Vermont elector gets the same vote as an elector in Florida. So we talk about 1 person, 1 vote, and 1 person, 1 vote means everyone's vote should be equal. Under a system of 1 person, 1 vote, a fundamental principle, it should be equal. But it's violated in our election by state-initiated winner-take-all laws, because that creates swing states, and because of the current allocation of electors. I'm just going to share one more little tidbit for you. Think about this. What happens if nobody receives 270 electoral votes? Who decides the election? What decides the election? Well, here's a little example. We have Democratic, Republican, and some third-party candidate. And in the election, the Democrat wins 267 votes. The Republican wins 265 votes, and the third-party candidate wins 2 very little states, 6 votes. And as a result, there are 538 electoral votes cast, but nobody gets 270. So what happens? Well, first of all, you should know that it has happened twice in 1800 and 1824, and it's almost happened a few other times. And what happens is the president is chosen by the House of Representatives. The newly elected House of Representatives takes office on January 2nd. The inauguration is on January 20th. And between that time period, the new House of Representatives votes to see who they're going to choose for the president. They grab the top 3 candidates in the election, and every state gets 1 vote. So Wyoming with 500,000 gets 1 vote. Florida with 21 million or 22 million gets 1 vote. Every state gets 1 vote. They cast their vote for one of the 3 leading candidates. The candidate that wins 26 states, 26 votes, wins. If states are split, if a state is split, that vote doesn't count. There are no half votes. So a candidate needs to win 26 votes. At the same time, we have to elect a vice president. Well, the vice president is elected by the Senate. The 2 top vice presidential contenders, they get onto the Senate floor Every senator gets one vote. DC does not get a vote. So there are 100 senators. If there is a split, because the winner needs a majority, if it's split 50-50, the existing vice president, the vice president that's leaving office on January 20th, that person casts the deciding vote. So it is, and by the way, that vice president becomes the acting president if the House doesn't reach a consensus, if the House doesn't reach a vote with 26. So you want to talk about one person, one vote? You want to talk about a system that's not that fair? That's the one we have now. So the question is, how do we fix it? How do we avoid no candidate receiving 270 votes? How do we stop a system where presidential elections are determined by less than 0.5% of the voters in 1 to 3 states? The answer is the national popular vote. It is an interstate compact approved by states who choose to participate. And those states agree to change how they award their electoral votes. It will guarantee the presidency to the candidate who wins the most votes from all the voters throughout all 50 states and the District of Columbia combined. Let me show you some of the features of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. The first is it respects states' rights. No constitutional amendment is required. It simply asks the states to do what's permitted in the Constitution, and that is change their system of how they award their electors. Award all of their states' electors to the candidate that wins the most votes across the country. In the end, candidates will end up campaigning in every state because they need every vote, not just the vote of swing state voters. And candidates will end up moving away from the extremes because, once again, they need all the votes they can get, not just a handful of special interest voters in a handful of states. And finally, national popular vote is supported by Republicans, Democrats, and more than 65% of the public. So Kathleen already alluded to this, that it's not wishful thinking, because national popular vote has already been enacted into law by 17 states and the District of Columbia. Those states that you see in green have already enacted it. The current total is 209 electoral votes. From here, just 61 more electoral votes are needed to reach 270. And that means states worth 270 electoral votes have committed to cast their votes for the candidate that wins the most popular votes nationwide. And so in the end, we'd be electing a president just as we elect a governor. The candidate that gets the most votes wins. Just as we elect a US senator, the candidate, by the way, just the same way we elect 517,000 elected officials across the United States. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kathleen and Barbara and see what kind of questions you have about things I spoke about or questions about things I didn't even touch on. Thank you, everybody. Guys, thank you for your attention.
Yeah, don't forget to vote, for goodness sakes. I think with this group, probably everyone's going to vote. You know, somebody once said, may you not live in interesting times. I think we live in very interesting times. On that note, thank you, everybody.